All right. Hello there, tea sippers out there. It is another glorious Wednesday, and you know what time it is. Now get your crumpets together, because, baby, it's time to dish tea. And you're dishing tea with Big Meat. Hey, babies. Thank you for your love and all of your support. If you're tuning in right now by computer and wish to chime in or want to make a comment, please call 347-205-9183. Again, 347-205-9183. Today is going to be a very serious topic, and I want you to make sure that you take notes, take accurate notes. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please don't be afraid to voice them, because this is concerning our health. It is concerning the pandemic, HIV and AIDS. Okay. The chat room is open, the tea room. So if you guys want to go over there and dish tea in the chat room, honey, please dish tea responsibly. It's okay to disagree. Please don't be disagreeable. All right. My disclaimer for the show, you guys know I have to say this because I make no excuses for it. This show is for mature audiences, and the language and subject matters are not appropriate for children or anyone who is not mature to handle the subject matters. Your listening discretion is advised. Again, your listening discretion is advised. I make no excuses for having a potty mouth. However, I just want to let you know that this is adult content, okay? With this topic, I deem today's show, if hope can take action, so can you. Today's show is going to facilitate around the idea of the HIV vaccines that are being tested. They have clinical trials going. They're looking for volunteers, and we'll get into all of that in a moment. But I want you to just be ready to take accurate notes, okay, and formulate your questions if you have them. Before we get started, let me say hello to my sponsors and to thank all those who support Dishing Tea for what we're all about. I want to thank Trade Day Management and PR firm. At Trade Day, enjoy a touch of Southern hospitality with a universal appeal for your public relations and entertainment management needs. Contact Travion Davenport at 678-523-3088. Again, 678-523-3088, or you could email her at tradedaypr@gmail.com. Tradeday, TREADAYPR@gmail.com. Pharaoh's Treasure Box, fine art, unique jewelry, and sensational 3D silk floral arrangements, creations by Taps. For your decorative needs, contact Pharaoh's Treasure Box at 248-688-5178 or 5179. Again, 248-688-5178 or 5179. Or you could email at Pharaoh's Treasure Box at Comcast.net. Pharaoh's Treasure Box at Comcast.net. Parisian Wine Productions, music to lighten your spirits and lift your soul, specializing in gospel, inspirational house tracks and dance music. Production consultant and the CEO of the company is Paris Hairston. You can contact him at 347-406-7734. Again, 347-406-7734, or email him at paris42268@yahoo.com. paris42268@yahoo.com. C-Train Productions. You are aboard the right train for all of your entertainment needs with C-Train Productions. Omar Casserly is the CEO and founder. For all of your casting, producing, and production needs, contact Omar at www.ctrainproductions.com. Once again, www.ctrainproductions.com. Life Fellowship of Christ Ministries, Live in Freedom Everywhere, LIFE. Reverend James Coleman is the leader and founder of this ecumenical social justice ministry, brought forth to free the oppressed and introducing a fresh approach to the Christ consciousness. Contact Reverend Coleman at mustardcole@yahoo.com. Again, mustardcole@yahoo.com. For information on times of services, please contact him at 313-833-9278. 313-833-9278. Eacham Vidal Couture. Enjoy high fashion with a luxurious twist. Step into the future with fresh, innovative couture. Designs by Miss Michi DeVale. For more information, contact Michi at 313-996-9807. Again, 313-996-9807. Big Brothers Network, BBN, a new online web magazine designed to show the world the class and style of the debonair man of size and his admirers, launching its first edition this Memorial Day weekend. For more information and for advertising rates, contact Big Daddy Tony Brown at tony@bigbrothersnetwork.com. Tony at bigbrothers, BROTHS, network.com. Special announcements, Five More Artists Detroit presents an evening of art, jazz, and theater, Saturday, June 5th, 2010, at the Samaritan Center, 5555 Connor Avenue, Detroit, Michigan. Tickets for this event are $15 in advance, $20 at the door. Portions of the proceeds will benefit the Uplifting Communities faith-based nonprofit organization. For more information, contact Peter Jackson at 248-688-5178 or 5179. Again, 248-688-5178 or 5179. Welcoming aboard our newest sponsor. This is ShowtownTV.com. SHO-TOWN-TV.com. We are not a website. We are internet television. Carlon Regina Dixon is the overseer and videographer for this event. For more information, contact her at ShowtownTV.com. Once again, Showtown, SHO-TOWN-TV.com. Thank you very much for all of my sponsors and for doing what you do to let me do what I do, okay? I love it. Okay, we're going to move forward today because I want to make sure that this information comes across very seriously, and I want you to please take note. I can't emphasize this enough. We all know the devastation that HIV and AIDS have caused the country, the world, the planet. And now doctors and those who are on the forefront of the fight for the cure, they are now in the process of doing clinical trial studies of HIV vaccines as a preventative measure. And I'm new to it as far as understanding what it's about. And that's why I wanted to make sure that we bring this subject here on the show. My guest today, he is one of the doctors who are spearheading the clinical studies here in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Mark Mulligan is a professor of medicine with the Division of Infectious Diseases at Emory University. He is the Associate Director for Clinical Trials at the Emory Vaccine Center. Dr. Mulligan serves as the Executive Director of the Hope Clinic of the Emory Vaccine Center. Now, the Hope Clinic is the clinical arm of the Emory Vaccine Center, and it is focused on clinical trials of vaccines and other prevention technologies, human immunology studies, education, and training the next generation of vaccine researchers. Dr. Mulligan also serves as co-director of the clinical's research core of the Emory Center for AIDS Research, also known as CFAR. So without any further ado, let's get right into it, and let's bring on board. This is Dr. Mark Mulligan. Hello, Dr. Mulligan. Thank you for coming on board with me today. How are you today, sir?
Oh, well, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm having a great day. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, let's get started because, as I said in the intro, I've heard about it a little bit a few years ago when it was a spectacle in the news that the possible vaccines were coming into play and this, that, and the other. Explain to us exactly what it is that you and your colleagues are doing with an HIV vaccine.
Well, we are doing human studies in men here in Atlanta and at 13 other cities around the country. And you're right, it is something that has been around for a while. When HIV was first identified as the virus that causes AIDS, back in 1984, the then Secretary of State, Margaret Heckler, said we'll have a vaccine in a year or two. Well, obviously, here we are. It's been 26 years since then, and we're still working. So it's a difficult challenge. And over those years, the epidemic has continued, not only in men in the U.S., but in women, and globally, it's become a major pandemic. As you know, every year in the U.S. now we have 56,000 new infections, and that has not changed in 15 years or so.
Wow.
Globally, we have 3 million new infections every year. There are 2 million deaths from HIV/AIDS every year globally. So that means we're adding 1 million people every year globally who are HIV infected. So this is a huge problem. It has not gone away, although, as you sort of said in your introduction, we don't hear quite as much about it anymore. It remains a major health problem globally, and it's one that's a real challenge because it is a viral infection, and normally that's something we can take care of with vaccines, and we're working very hard. There's a huge effort, but so far we haven't been successful, but we are seeing some light for the first time really in this last year. There's some light at the end of the tunnel, and we have an exciting opportunity, a new clinical trial, new study that we're doing now.
Really? Okay, well, let's back up a minute, because with the onset of the HIV meds now, I've always said that the CDC has taken what I feel to believe a backwards approach at the prevention messages that are out there, because since we've had a lot of protease inhibitors and all these other different meds, a lot of folks want to believe that undetectable means cured, because they're healthy, they're living, and a lot of folks are having the wrong messages out there. Is that something that your department also tackles, or is that separate from what the CDC ought to be looking into?
Well, it is something that is a component of our work, because we are a human studies program. We interact with communities and individuals. We have to engage, raise awareness, educate communities before we ever invite them to participate in our studies. And so the new treatments that we've had, really the protease inhibitors, the highly active therapy, have been around now since 96, 97, and they have been a godsend. Deaths from AIDS, HIV in the U.S. have fallen. We used to have 55,000 deaths a year in the U.S. That's a whole Vietnam's worth of deaths, if you want to think of it that way.
Right.
In the Vietnam conflict, we had 55,000 deaths total over that whole war. We were having that every year before 96 due to HIV/AIDS in the U.S. That's now fallen down. We're running now about 16,000 deaths a year. So in the U.S. and in developed wealthy nations, there's real progress there. And it is true that if you are able to afford the medications, if you're able to take them reliably and tolerate them, because there are some side effects, that you can do very well. Your viral load can become undetectable. The T cells can come up. And we believe that based on several studies that have been conducted, people whose viral loads are lower are less likely to transmit the virus to their sexual partners. It's not 100%. It's not a sure thing, and we still would encourage practicing safer sex. Another thing to remember is that whether it's an HIV vaccine or HIV treatment, that's not going to affect the potential transmission of other sexually transmitted infections like herpes, gonorrhea, syphilis, etc. So I think that you're right. In some ways, it's kind of a mixed message, is that we should take these meds and get our viral loads down, but I don't think that gives us a free pass in terms of, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, in terms of safer sex.
Okay. Well, and what I want to do here is bring HIV and AIDS up to where we are now, to say that there's light at the end of the tunnel is very, very promising right now. But over the years, there has been a lot of I don't necessarily want to call them, old wives' tales or myths or whatever. But I remember in the earlier stages, maybe in the late 90s, around about 96, 97, right when the protease inhibitors became popular. There were studies that every other day it was something, the urine of a pregnant woman was supposed to have been, effective in reducing HIV infections, and components in saliva was able to kill the HIV, and et cetera, et cetera. Since that time, when a lot of these studies were hitting the forefront and in medical journals or whatever, what has changed from then until now that we see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I think that's a really important question. There are a lot of things that are sort of a flash in the pan that have initial promise in animal studies or in phase 1 early human studies, but it's really only when you get to the big field study and you ask the question, does it work in humans, that we get the final answer. And in the last few years, the light at the end of the tunnel has been that we've learned an awful lot from these large human effectiveness or efficacy studies, where we've asked the question, if we take a large group of HIV uninfected men or men and women, give half of them vaccine and half of them placebo, sugar pill shot, and then follow them for 3 years, and then we do the standard of care in these clinical trials. You can never in medical research do less than the current standard of care. That would be unethical to withhold care. So we're talking about HIV prevention through vaccines. So what's the standard of care for HIV prevention? Well, it's condoms, counseling, education, safer sex, and so we do that in these studies for both the vaccine group and the placebo group. And then at the end of 3 to 4 years, thereabouts, we look at the numbers of infections. We're testing people really every quarter during the course of the study, and we look to see are there fewer infections in the vaccine group compared to the placebo group. We also look to see in those who become infected, did the vaccine perhaps lower their viral load if they get infected after receiving the vaccine compared to the placebo. So there's a very scientific way to ask, do these things work in human beings? And that's where a lot of the things that may have looked promising earlier tend to fall out. What we've learned is that for the first time ever in a large study that was done in Thailand with 16,000 people, and this was announced in the fall of 2009, September 2009. It was published in Medical Journal December 2009. So it's relatively new information. 8,000 got vaccine, 8,000 got placebo. They all got the standard of care, counseling, education, condoms. This was in a heterosexual community risk population. It did include men who have sex with men, injection drug users, but it was mostly heterosexual general population in Thailand. They found a 30% reduction in numbers of infections in the vaccine group compared to the placebo group, and that's the first time ever we've had a positive result in an efficacy trial of an HIV vaccine. So that's the light at the end of the tunnel that I referred to. Okay. The reason I say we're in the tunnel and seeing the light in the distance and not standing underneath the headlight just yet is that 30% isn't quite where we want to be. We would like our vaccines to be better than that, and so we still have a ways to go. This study needs to be repeated in another population. Hopefully we can learn all we can from that experience and improve on it.
Okay. Well, with a study such as this, the virus itself becomes so unpredictable because, we hear a lot about those who are already HIV infected becoming double infected or reinfected, if you will, with a different strain of the virus, and et cetera, et cetera. How are you measuring the strain, or is the strain in the virus actually being regulated? Is more so the vaccine and how the vaccine work against the virus itself?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question. So in people who get vaccinated and then become infected, what's going on there? Is it because the vaccine didn't cover the strain they're getting infected with? and we're seeing sort of a sieve that is some strains can get in, but we are blocking some, and that is still being looked at. It does appear in early work that there may be some blocking of certain strains. So I think so far our vaccines have been partially effective. And you're right, this virus is highly mutable. It mutates a lot, and that's one of the problems with the antiretrovirals, the protease inhibitors, is that if you don't take every dose every day religiously, there is a potential for development of resistance in the virus to the medicines, and then they stop working. That's why we have to tell our patients that this is, for you, this is like air, like water, like food. You need it every day, and you've got to build it into your regimen, put it right there next to your toothbrush, whatever. You've got to do it every day for it to work. And when we start missing doses, the virus takes advantage of us and mutates, and then learns how to escape or be resistant to that infection. Same kind of idea with a vaccine. There's going to be a challenge of the virus always mutating, and maybe the immune response, which is what a vaccine does, it induces immunity through antibodies and killer T cells. It could be that the viruses will become resistant to that. And so in designing our vaccines, we have to be strategic, just as with our antiretroviral therapy, the protease inhibitors, et cetera. We have to be strategic and be sure to take every dose, or encourage our patients to take every dose every day. We've got to have that same mentality with vaccines to try to not let this virus mutate and escape from the immune response we induce. So there are many challenges, that's for sure. We're thrilled about the light at the end of the tunnel, and we're pretty excited about this new study now that we're lifting off on here in Atlanta.
Okay. Okay, now let's delve into the study itself, because when I went to HopeTakesAction.net or .org?
Org.
Is org. Okay. When I went to the website and I looked over some of the volunteers, well, all of them that were posted, the videos of what they were feeling and why they decided to volunteer. There's also a discussion portion in there, or somewhere where I read some people were asking questions, and this one particular question it was a bit harsh. However, it was very valid, and he was, or the person that posted was an HIV positive person. And his question that he asked was, why is it that we're concentrating on a vaccine first for those who are not infected versus looking at a cure for those who already have it and are battling with it every day?
Yeah, that is a critical, well, it's a very important question. We have a community of people who are positive living with HIV, and we have to take care of those already infected. And I do think that website that you referred to, HopeTakesAction.org, is good. And as you said, there's some videos on there from people that are currently participating, which are good. And I guess you were in some kind of a blog or chat section. And that's a question that I think is really important. Really, we want to take care of everybody. The people that are infected know they have an infection, and as you well know, I'm sure most of your audience knows, there has been great advocacy amongst people living with HIV demanding development of medicines, reasonable pricing of medicines, new medicines, and it's amazing, that advocacy amongst the community of those living with HIV has worked so well, and we've had incredible successes with treatment. Now, cure is a different thing. Our treatments are not a cure. And I think you said that at the top of the show, and it so happens that in 1998 I was on the Oprah Winfrey Show to talk about HIV vaccines, and this was not long after Magic Johnson had announced that he was positive. And
right. That's why your face looks so familiar.
Yeah, he said that he was on treatment and that his virus was undetectable. And one of the questions that Oprah asked me was, does that mean he's cured? And that's a very important question. And unfortunately, we don't have a cure. So whether it's magic or anybody else, if you stop taking the medicines, the virus will come right back up in the bloodstream. It is, in essence, while we're on treatment, even if we get it undetectable in our blood test, the virus is still there in our lymph nodes, liver, spleen, other places in the body, and we are controlling it, but we're not eradicating or curing it in a final way. Yes, that is something we need to work on, cure for people. In the meantime, we have treatment, and there are innovative strategies for that. The NIH, the government, is funding research on that, so that work needs to continue. At the same time, I do want to say that there's another group of people, and those are young people today who are coming up. They're exploring their sexuality, and it's absolutely critical that they get the education they need so they can stay safe. If they are going to be sexually active, if they make that decision, then they have got to use condoms. But at the same time, we know that we don't want sex to be a death sentence. We don't want human nature, which is occasionally we may not do things exactly the way that we know we should, and someone who makes maybe a wrong decision or a mistake, doesn't use a condom, we don't want that to result in someone becoming HIV infected. If we had a vaccine, then we would be able to, hopefully, this is the goal, to protect young people. Actually, it's young people who are affected more than any other group by these new infections. The statistics are staggering. More than 50% of the new infections occur in young people under the age of 25. And in the South, particularly, we're talking about young black men, and particularly black men who have sex with men, is the group that has been hit the hardest in our country by this epidemic. So we've got a huge group of young people every year, new young people who are coming up, and that's why there's so much attention on a vaccine. It almost goes back to the things that our mothers taught us. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We want the cure. We need it, but we also we don't want to add more people to the group that's already infected. So I guess the short answer would be the blogger whose quote you read there is right, and we've got to do both.
I'm flabbergasted at the moment. Where is the prevention message going wrong? Because with young kids, it floors me when I run into 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds who say they're HIV positive at 16 and 17 years old. And a lot of them seem to believe that, oh, well, all I got to do is just take my medicine and I'll be good, or all I got to do is just take this and I'll be fine, and, this, that, and the other. But where do we go wrong as far as educating the populace? Is it something that we're missing? Is it something that we're not saying? Is it something that we're not being honest about?
All the above.
Okay.
I mean, I think you're hitting on all of it, and there are a lot of things here at work, and we've got to start early, even before they become sexually active. So we're talking about the schools and the school districts and the superintendents buying in to sex education and frank, factual sex education. We're talking about probably, starting in middle school or even before junior high school. I mean, you've got to start early. And you meet kids where they are. They know a lot more than us older folks tend to give them credit for, I think.
True.
And so you do age-appropriate education. They don't necessarily, at the earliest ages, need to know every last detail of anatomy and plumbing and all of that, but they do need to begin to get the concepts. And then certainly in high school, if you think you're going to start in high school, the show's over. We've got to start very young. These are my personal opinions. I'm a physician. I'm an HIV researcher and caregiver. I'm not professionally an educator, but I'm just giving you my opinion. I think we've got to start early.
That's fine.
We've got to be frank. And we've got to be comfortable as adults talking about sex in a way that is factual, and I think we need to have the idea that in doing this we are saving lives. Even though many of us in our generation, we didn't talk about sex, we're uncomfortable with it. The whole thing about, stigma against men who have sex with men, or stigma against gay people. Stigma is something that hurts a lot, because if we're not going to talk about certain things because we don't talk about that, then that's hiding it, and that is what leads to problems, because then people aren't going to be frank. And so we've got to be open to discuss sexuality in all its forms, and do that with the point of view that we are saving lives. We have to give people the information and say, if you decide to be sexually active, you have got to be safe. You've got to use a condom every time, and no exceptions, really, because otherwise it's a Russian roulette. You have to use the idea that potentially anyone you're having sex with is potentially HIV infected.
Okay, now here is where I'm going to play maybe devil's advocate, but my whole thing is, I think with the prevention message itself, most of us are in a stage of being very independent, very, I'm grown and you can't tell me what to do kind of mentality. And the idea that one must use a condom, the prevention message has always been, you gotta use. And there doesn't, we know for practical purposes there shouldn't be an alternative. But for those who feel as though they're being railroaded and bamboozled into saying that they have to use this, plus all of the, okay, they don't feel comfortable, I don't feel the same way, and this, that, and the other, all of the ifs, ands, and buts that goes with condom usage. Why haven't, not why haven't, is there an advocacy of doctors out there who, like yourself, who are on the cutting edge of developing this vaccine, that may be going to the CDC and like, look, we've got to change the message or something because we're not reaching them. Right. Is there, is that fight?
Absolutely. I think there are efforts to tweak the messages, particularly as we're talking now about mature individuals. There are people that don't like condoms. There's no question about it. And so what can be done about that? There have to be creative approaches, innovation. It may well include some new technologies, and there are a number of things being tested, which we can talk about a little bit. None of them have worked so far. In general, our HIV prevention efforts, both through the education and condom route and through the novel biomedical interventions, to date, vaccines, except for the one light at the end of the tunnel that I talked about. Otherwise, they haven't worked. We've tried microbicides for women. Those haven't worked. They're also being looked at for men. We've tried herpes virus treatment as a method to reduce transmission of HIV. That didn't work. We tried the diaphragm. There was a study in women in Africa to see if the diaphragm could be useful. Unfortunately, that didn't work. So there's another type of study that's going on right now called PrEP, Pre-Exposure Prophylaxis. It's an acronym, and that is actually taking a pill every day. You're uninfected, but you take a pill every day to keep you from getting infected. And there are large studies going on, really? Many of which will be announced later this year. In most of these studies, at the same time, they give the message of using condoms and being safe, but it's just like in the vaccine trials. We know that doesn't work all that well, and so yes, we have to do it because it's a standard of care, but the truth is we know that there are going to be people who will get infected during the course of these studies. So what we're trying to do with these additional technologies that I've just mentioned is to add on to the basic condom message. I think with the condom message itself, there are some things that need to be done in terms of creativity and innovation, such as making it more sexy or interesting or fun or spicy or whatever you want to call it. And there are some groups doing research on that to make it more cool. I had a volunteer in the clinic the other day who told me he didn't like condoms, and we hear that periodically. This is somebody who's participating in one of our studies, and I talked to him about, once he got to know us in the Hope Clinic, and we like to think of our volunteers as potential ambassadors people who might go out and mention to their friends that, hey, I'm doing an HIV vaccine study, and you might want to call this number and check it out. It's a good experience, etc. I told him, if you feel that way, maybe you could do this. And here's what he said to me. He said, I probably would, but thing is, 7 or 8 out of my 10 best friends are already positive.
Mm.
It was a striking moment for me. This is a black man who has sex with men living in Atlanta, and I think that tells you, and this was the same gentleman who told me he doesn't like condoms. You start thinking about that, it tells you, I think, in part what's happening in the Southeast, in particular among black MSM, is there's just a pretty high odd of running into HIV and sex partners, a lot more than, say, in Kansas or in a lot of other places. We have such a high prevalence among black MSM in the Southeast and probably around the country that it's just that's why those numbers are so shocking, and that's why we've got to continue with the education, but really we need a vaccine or some of these other biomedicals, because we know the condoms aren't for everybody, as you just said.
Here's another thing. See, I moved here 3 years ago from Detroit, and I remembered prior to me moving here, the CDC had released information that HIV infection as well as syphilis and gonorrhea had spiked so heavily that the zip code was 48203. That's a Detroit zip code. We had reached number 1 with the spike in infections and also with other STIs, sexually transmitted infections. And has that, since that time, this was, let's see, I moved here in 2007. I want to say this was around about 2003 or 2004. Since that time, I'm hearing you say here in Southeast, in the southeast portion of the country, but since that time, has the South just taken over these numbers, or is it possibly because of the migration from, particularly here in Atlanta, we have a huge population here of immigrants, if you will, coming from other different states, just like myself.
Yeah.
So could that be that the rise in the numbers are coming from transplants such as myself? Or is it just the education difference here in the South versus the North and other parts of the country?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's probably true that we have a real problem here, and there also are problems in other cities in the North, including Detroit, New York. And it is what you say. It's not throughout all of Detroit. It's not throughout necessarily all of Atlanta. There are what we call geosentinel foci, or zip codes. And we now have ways to map all this out, and you can actually see that in that zip code, that's where we have the highest HIV prevalence in the Atlanta area, and those are the areas where we're focusing a lot of our prevention efforts, and I'm sure they're doing the same thing in Detroit. So I think that we do have these, we call them hot pockets or areas in many of our major cities, and it's part messaging. I think it also has to do with structural problems, socioeconomic status, access to care, people who are without homes and jobs, and there are a lot of other things that sort of go into maybe why in certain communities the messages don't work as well. I mean, there are basic problems in every community that it's just tough to change sexual behavior, but I think you're right. There are certainly certain foci where the problem is really intense, and where we do need to direct most of our efforts. I don't really think our problem in Atlanta is due to any sort of importing. I think we've got our own problem right here.
Someone in my chat room here says the reason of the South is being so high because of the church culture, not wanting to talk about it. He said we as black men just don't talk because HIV has become par for the course for black MSMs. Interesting. Very,
it is interesting.
Very interesting, because that statistic, that anecdote that your participant had said is, as far as 7 out of 10 of his best friends are positive. Many of us are in those same circles. I know I am. I know I am in that circle. Where many of those who are my core, are positive, and it tends to be. I'm trying to work this right. Let me ask the question. When you're looking at the studies, what is the ratio between African American men versus African American women, and then other ethnicities within HIV infections?
Right. Yeah. Very important. We always say we want our studies to reflect the populations most affected by HIV/AIDS, and as you know, nationally, the statistics are that it's a disease where minorities are overrepresented, Black, Hispanic in particular, and in the Southeast, it's even more of the same. In the state of Georgia, the new infections every year, something in the range of 85 to 90% occur in African Americans across the board. So that's where our focus needs to be as a research program in the Southeast, in Atlanta, and so we're making progress. At the same time, you have to remember we're in the Southeast, which is where the darn Tuskegee study was done, and where there is where there is understandable distrust with researchers, with the government. Basically a study where the government researchers withheld treatment from Black men and treated them like guinea pigs to watch them die in Alabama. I've practiced and worked at University in Alabama for 20 years before coming here to Atlanta. So we do struggle with that legacy, and I do want to say that is a done deal. That doesn't happen anymore. That all of our studies since then are very tightly regulated. We have the FDA, we have our local ethics committees at our universities and hospitals, and we don't do things like that anymore. I think people know that, but I do want to say that so everyone's very clear that there's nothing like that is happening anymore. And on the other hand, our current participation is better than it was a few years ago. To answer your question, right now in the current study, the Life Forward or 505 study that we're doing, we've now enrolled 40% are Caucasian, and that means 60% are mainly African American and a few other multiracial and so forth. So to me, that is tremendous. We've never done that well before. So I do think we're getting participation, and part of what's really made the difference for us in this study, we'd always done in the past about 25% African American, which was better than the national average. The national average in these studies was maybe 15%, and yet we, nationally more than 50% of the HIV infections are in African Americans. So it still wasn't good enough. Even in Atlanta, it wasn't near what it should have been. We have always felt we need to be the leaders in terms of African American community education, engagement, gaining the trust. And that means having African Americans in our staff, having Black MSM who are from the leather community, from the bear community, from we're looking to hire transgender. All these communities, we have staff members who are out in the bars, in the parks, in the bookstores, in the venues, doing house parties, house balls, barbecues, bowling night. We're doing these kinds of things, engaging, educating, and then, and only then, inviting participation in this effort to get control of this epidemic, which is raging in this community right now.
Wow. Wow. Let me ask this, because I know dealing with my populace, we tend to be very resistant and judgmental towards information. Are you finding that you're able to start to build the trust on your own recognizances, or do you have to? Are you finding that you're going to need a gatekeeper so that the trust can be built, so that the dialogue can start, and then folks can come in? I know you just outlined that, saying that this is what you do for to get it, but personally, just not acting as the doctor, but just personally as Mr. Mark Mulligan, going out to face it. Are you finding it difficult?
Yes, I mean, I think I'm very willing and interested and always available. I tell my staff, let me know. I'll come anytime, anywhere to talk about this with great passion. I mean, I hope you can tell I'm very passionate about this. I think I've got the best job. I've got the best job in the world, and it's something that we try to have a culture at the Hope Clinic of passion to basically to help us whoop HIV is what we're all about. And so I'm very comfortable in going out, but I know at the same time I'm not always the right messenger, or maybe not the right first messenger. I'm a Caucasian 50-year-old heterosexual guy. I have a staff that is very smart and bright and comes from the communities that we're trying to work in, and I work with them and often through them. And I guess you could say that they are the eyes and arms and mouths and gatekeepers out in the community that get us into the places we need to be with some buy-in.
Okay. Now let me revisit this, because with the whole idea of condom usage and getting the message out there that condoms need to be an essential part of sexual play, why hasn't anyone started to tackle health issues with condom uses, such as erectile dysfunction, diabetes, and all that kind of things, to make it improbable for condom use to be used on the regular? Has anyone started to look into that as far as the prevention message, or is that something that is that needs to be a task force needs to be created to look at that specifically?
I think we do need that. I've not heard those specific topics raised. As I said before, I know there are efforts and research and probably task force trying to enhance, to sexualize, to increase interest in condoms as a part of routine sexual play, but I haven't heard those topics addressed. But I wouldn't be surprised if the people that are really doing that, and I'm not one of them, are thinking about those things. But it's a good thought, and actually that's something that I will try to relay on to colleagues that I know are working in this area.
Okay, because I've brought that up to the CDC on several occasions. I used to be an HIV risk assessment counselor back in Detroit. So, and I dealt with the transgender populace. That was my specialty. And in dealing with it, from their particular standpoint, a lot of our trans women, and I'm saying trans women, male to female trans persons that I dealt with specifically, whether they were on hormone treatments and things, they were having problems with erections, and many of them were commercial sex workers. So a lot of them, were making their money based on how quote unquote freaky they can be. And now, with the onset of Levitra and Viagra and this, that, and the other, all of these sexually enhancement drugs and erectile dysfunction drugs, and it's becoming such a common problem now for those who are overweight, those who are diabetic, those who are having circulation problems and things, to where fighting to put a condom on, yes, I can get an erection, but then when it's time to put this damn condom on, the thought of putting this thing on, then it becomes a problem. And, I've heard it on several occasions, and I've taken it to them. And I was told, quite frankly, that the money is not there for that, because, if they don't have sex, then that's just one less person we have to worry about, basically, is the essence of the conversation.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of risk reduction and in terms of being on point with discovering a vaccine and making sure that sexual education is taught properly or is all-inclusive, I've always asked that question. So I'm hoping that, this doesn't fall on deaf ears, and you could take that to those who are in this, and doing that, so that they can look at that as an actual component, because for black men, that's one thing that we don't talk about because it's a cultural thing. There's a lot of things in black culture that we don't talk about being, mental health issues, and we don't talk about if your man can't get it up. Those are taboos within
Right.
black culture. And so to say that, I can't work because I got to put this condom on or whatever, I'd rather go without it because it saves me embarrassment, it saves me this, it saves me that, and then we end up putting ourselves at more risk.
Yeah.
At a greater risk.
Yeah, very superb comments, and I couldn't agree more. That's a problem, and that's a part of this whole picture why we're having such a problem with HIV. The transgender community is one that we're reaching out to. We had a cultural competency session at the Hope Clinic a couple weeks ago, and we had the Someone Cares group, which is a transgender, another MSM black community support group, come in and bring a few of the trans women in, and one trans man, and it was a great session for my staff of nurses, doctors, and other staff members too, because if we're inviting participation from that community, we want to be sure we understand things that are on their mind and can be properly receptive for them. As you've said, a very high risk for HIV community, because there so often are, you talk about stigma for MSM, there's even greater stigma for trans people, and they're often out on the street, and so out of their house, and may have to, as you've said, rely on sex work for survival.
Exactly. Now let's go into the vaccine itself, because you said something very interesting, and that is because we're here in the South, a lot of African Americans are very cautious about going into studies because of the Tuskegee study from back in the day. And I know the first question on the frequently asked questions here at HopeTakesAction.org is, we know vaccines usually contain the virus itself so that the body builds immunity to it. Does this vaccine, and I know it says no, but I want you to explain that to the audience exactly what the vaccine is for those, if you participate in the study and you happen to get the vaccine versus the placebo. What does that do? Break that down.
Okay. The caller's question is an important one, or the blogger's question, and the answer is that the vaccine does not contain the whole virus. It is true that many of our childhood vaccines, measles, mumps, rubella, contain a weakened form, a live attenuated virus, or a killed virus where the whole thing's there but it's been killed. And those are used then to inject into the body, into the arm usually, and cause an immune response. The immune response then protects if you ever come in contact with the real virus, which has the potential to cause disease later. And they either prevent infection or prevent disease from the infection. And that has been where technology started with vaccines, but we've moved along. And so now we have several FDA-approved vaccines which are not whole viruses, but in fact contain just a component. One way I like to describe it for the vaccine we're now using, it's not the whole virus. You cannot catch HIV or AIDS from the virus, from the vaccine. You couldn't give HIV or AIDS to a partner from getting the vaccine. It's as if you think of the virus as your whole hand, in the vaccine we have just one or two fingers from the hand. It's a crude example, but I'm trying to make the point that there are a couple of 2 or 3 components from the entire virus which are in the vaccine, but never the whole thing, never the whole hand, only a couple of fingers. And the parts that are in there are parts that we think are critical to induce the immune response. Vaccines are all about inducing memory and immunological memory, and we think these are the parts that are most effective to induce protection through memory. And by memory I mean you get the vaccine, you train the immune system, and then if you ever get exposed to the real virus later in life, your immune system has a memory, remembers that, oh, that's bad, and I need to go and attack it and kill it and not let it cause infection or disease. It's kind of like having a hound dog, if you will. You give it a sniff of somebody's shoe, and you send that hound dog out to find it. Once you get your vaccine, you've trained the hound dogs. They've got the sniff of that virus, and they're on guard. That's how it's supposed to work, and that's how vaccines do work. that's what we need for HIV. So no, there's never the whole virus there. It's one or two key components.
Okay. A question from the chat room. Will there be a working vaccine in our lifetime?
I sure hope so. The first vaccine trials started in 1988, roughly, so it's been going on for 22 years. Vaccines in general do take decades to develop. Example, polio. In the 1930s, the first polio vaccines, actually some people were killed by them. And it was only when technology evolved to where that virus, the polio virus, could be cultured, grown in the laboratory, that then Dr. Sabin and Dr. Salk were able to develop the polio vaccines in the late 50s that became effective. Think about polio in the 50s in the U.S. Mothers were afraid to send their children out to swimming pools because in the summer there seemed to be more transmission, more spreading of this polio virus. And we had all the March of Dimes and this big national effort. That's the kind of effort we need for HIV too. But they hung in there from the early disappointments in the 30s and finally in the 50s. So that was a 20 to 30 year span from failure to ultimate success. And because they persisted, they hung in there. So I do think that with persistence, with sustained effort and good collaboration, scientific cooperation, that we will succeed. And I do think it'll be in my lifetime. I think we've come a long way. It's not going to be in 5 or 10 years. It's more likely to be in 10 to 20 years, in my opinion. But that's just about the right time frame. It takes that long to develop these vaccines. I mean, it's not right. We want it right away, but that's how long it's probably going to take.
Wow. Now, here's another interesting question. I know that the Red Cross and the Red Cross particularly had started refusing MSMs from giving blood because of the HIV scare. Now, for those who are on the vaccine, will they be able, if they wanted to donate blood or whatever, will they be able to donate and live regularly like that, or will that be a restriction?
Yeah, that one is one that we have developed approaches to, education, counseling, for the blood banks, and this is kind of the same thing with insurance. What happens, the vaccine is designed to induce an immune response. And so if someone goes and gets tested, what does the test look at when you get an HIV test? It's measuring antibodies, one of the immune responses that the vaccine would hopefully induce. And so it is possible. It depends a little bit on which vaccine, but more and more as these vaccines are getting stronger and better, people who get an HIV vaccine and then go get a regular HIV test, the kind of blood test that is done initially, they might show up as appearing either indeterminate or positive. We can always sort that out by doing the viral load test. People who get a vaccine and have vaccine-induced seropositivity or vaccine-induced positive blood test will not be positive on their the test for the virus itself. So we can always sort that out and know if it's just due to the vaccine or if it might be due to actual infection. The chat room question is, would they still be able to donate blood? What we do during the course of the study is encourage people not to get tested outside of the confines of the study. If they need testing for work or military or whatever, we'll do it, and we can let them know, if it's okay to go get tested elsewhere if nothing's showing up. If something's showing up in the regular blood test, we will work with them with letters, counseling, ID cards. Not counseling, but letters, talking to their employers or their insurer or the military, whatever it might be. Donating blood is not recommended because that does automatically trigger and mean getting an HIV antibody test when you try to donate blood, and so then that that could create some paperwork and some things in the system. So when people are in the study, we don't recommend that they get tested outside or donate blood. Look, the way I like to think of it is, eventually we're all going to be HIV positive. Now, what do I mean? What I mean is when we have a vaccine, and I just said I think we're going to have it in our lifetime, when we have a vaccine, we're going to be giving it, really I think it would need to be given to adolescents. But ultimately, all of society, it's going to be another vaccine, another shot like we get for measles, mumps, and everything else. Everybody's going to be developing these antibodies and potentially have a blood test where it might show up. And we will have systems in place to sort it out, like the viral load test. If someone shows up as positive, we'll do the other test for the virus itself to tell, well, is that just because of the vaccine they got, because of their routine medical care, or have they become infected? So it's kind of we're in a transition time now. We kind of have to get over it, and it's the only way forward.
Okay. Oh, excuse me. Okay. So now, well, take us through the process of if someone wants to volunteer, because I know I came across this because I went to volunteer for the study. However, I'm a heavyset guy, and I did not meet the weight requirements. Plus, I'm asthmatic as well, and that there was a concern because I have a comorbidity. So explain to us the process of how one can become a volunteer with the study.
Sure, I'm happy to do it. First of all, thank you for your interest and participation. And it does sometimes happen that people that come in and are very interested are not able to participate for some medical reason. And then we ask them, well, you can still be a vaccine champion and help us in other ways. And obviously by including this topic on your program, you're doing that. So thank you for that. It's another way to help fight. So that's great. For some people, it'll be being in the study. For others, it'll be other things, maybe spreading the word. Like you are. So basically the study, the Life Forward 505 study is we're seeking men who have sex with men 18 to 45 years old who want to help fight HIV. And we will test to be sure these are prevention vaccines for people who are not infected to try to help protect them against AIDS. And so we will test people to make sure they're uninfected at the beginning. That's part of the screening process. And we'll also ask some health questions. And you do have to have general good health. So most people who have maybe one minor health problem, one or two, would likely still be eligible. Someone had, let's say, severe diabetes and really bad kidney or heart disease, they may not be eligible. But most generally healthy adults, and again, most people in the 18 to 45 are pretty healthy in the younger age group, would be eligible. So the first thing is to get in contact with us, and that can be through our 1-800 number, which is 877-424-HOPE, or 4673 is the HOPE part of that. Or through our email, which is vaccine@emory.edu. And you've mentioned the website already, and that's the hopetakesaction.org. So you can get information on the web, but you can also call us or email us, and then we'd talk to a recruiter on the phone to make sure basic criteria seem reasonable, and then we would invite you to come in. We'll try to answer questions. The first time the potential volunteer comes in, we do one simple blood test, which is a requirement for the study. We check to make sure their adenovirus titer is negative. One of the components of the vaccine is a weakened cold virus called an adenovirus, which is used as a vector to deliver the vaccine. It can't cause cold. It's been disabled, but it's a good way to deliver the vaccine. So we're only enrolling negative men in that study. And if they pass that first simple blood test, we come back for a second visit. And then after we go through the consent process and they get all their questions answered, make sure they have full understanding, and we do this with full respect for their opinion, their feeling. If somebody changes their mind at any time, it's fine. The volunteer's the boss, and we're just thrilled that we had the chance to tell them about the study. They may elect not to do it, and we understand. That's okay. But if they decide they want to go forward, then we do the HIV test, a full physical exam, and we check one liver enzyme test to make sure that the liver is in pretty reasonable shape. And that's it, really. If all that checks out, you come back for a third visit and get the first of the vaccinations. And we see the participants 8 times in the first year. We reimburse $75 for each visit. And then there's a quarterly visit 4 times a year for probably it's going to end up being 3 years or so. So we do provide that $75 reimbursement for each of the visits in recognition that the volunteers are incurring some expense, maybe some time away from work, gasoline, travel, whatever the case may be. And all of these studies are approved by the FDA and the Emory Ethics Committee, and we have permission for all of the things that we're doing from these committees. So that's a quick snapshot of the study. There are 4 injections of vaccine at months 0, 1, 2, and then 6, and then we follow people. And half of the participants will get the real vaccine and half will get placebo. It's a double-blind study. They won't know. We won't know. That's how we do the science, so we don't introduce bias. We ask all of our volunteers to remain safe, to continue to protect themselves. We don't want anybody to get infected. We have bowls full of condoms in our clinic that we provide to our participants. It's a nice environment. We pride ourselves on treating our volunteers as if they're worth their weight in gold. I really view them as heroes because they're coming in and helping us in this mission to get control of this epidemic that is just raging in the community.
Okay. All right. Now, okay, I have a couple of questions here from the tea room again. How can the PAWS population give an assist to this particular study?
Yeah, we get a lot of calls from people who hear our message and want to help. And when we find out they're positive, we're not able to go forward with enrollment in the study. But one of the things we say is that if you have friends or colleagues who might be interested, that would be great. And can you help us spread the word? So it's kind of like I said to you, is that we appreciate you becoming an ambassador for this work, even though you weren't able to directly get in there, roll up your sleeve, and receive the vaccine and be part of the actual study. We can still have vaccine soldiers who are helping us fight this fight. And so the positive community, I think, can be a part of that effort. And we have positive staff members. We have positive people on our community advisory board who are doing exactly that, recognizing that for their loved ones who are negative, for members of their community who are negative, we need a vaccine to help try to keep people healthy and negative. So I think that's the main thing is maybe helping to spread the word.
Okay. Now, along with spreading the word, does Hope Takes Action need monetary donations or any types of donations? If so, or how does that work if someone wanted to do that?
Yes, we are, as you said at the top of the show, we are part of the Emory Vaccine Center, and we have a development office that is very happy when we receive donations to help support our work. And if you go to the website for the Hope Clinic, which is hopeclinic.emory.edu, there's a tab there that talks about donating, and I think there's a way to access that system. So we do receive and accept donations. We get great support from philanthropists in the community. There's a group of guys here who, guys and gals, but it's largely an MSM group that does the AIDS Vaccine 200 bike ride. And that bike ride's coming up May 22nd and 23rd. They ride 100 miles to Athens, Georgia, and then 100 miles back. And it ends at the Hope Clinic on Sunday, the 23rd this year, in the afternoon. And these riders are coming in. They're also heroes. They're vaccine soldiers. They're riding their bike, and they get people to sponsor them. Last year, I think it was about 85 riders raised $175,000 for the vaccine center. Not all of that comes to the Hope Clinic, but a chunk of that comes to the Hope Clinic, and we use those dollars to support our outreach, our education, our engagement of the community, to help us in preparing educational materials for the community. Also to do some of the things that, although we do have federal funding from NIH and CDC and other groups for the work we do, those dollars are often limited, and we're not able to have as great a flexibility as we need to develop new programs, new efforts, and in particular the dollars to support community education. So there is a way to do that if there's any interest, and it's always much appreciated.
Okay. All right. All right. See, that there is wonderful. That folks could come in and can actually take this by the horns and to help with the educational process. Now, again, I want to go back to this educational component because I personally, I'm starting to believe that we tend to use the word education, and it's become such a broad term, and nobody really understands what it means, and or want to have it limited, and box education and saying, okay, all we need is the scientific research, and all we need is this, and this. However, as we press forward for educating the populace, if you will, what do you believe ought to be added? Okay, we've talked about being frank, but as far as educating the people, what do you think ought to be included into the conversation now, as we are 26 years in? Because what we're hearing is the same stuff over and over and over. So what do you think needs to be added?
Yeah, I think that's important. We do have to change the message, refresh it. We have to use new technologies. The Internet is where MSM are these days. It's a big switch from just 10 years ago. So we've got to use the latest technologies, Facebook, Twitter, text messaging, to send out prevention messages. And there are many groups that are doing this now. It's a whole new way to get on the chat rooms, the Manhunt and all those places, and have some way to at least link to. They may need to have an attractive looking guy on there, and it has a link that sort of says help in the most important fight of your life, or something like that. And then you go there and you find out, well, this is for an HIV vaccine study, or this is promoting safer sex, or whatever. And you could say, well, really, it's kind of like they said, Willie Sutton, you got to go where the money is. We got to go where the people are, and they're on the Internet. So that's one thing, I think, changing the technology, the delivery. So kudos to you, because obviously that's what your program is all about. So that's great. I think another thing is the idea of testing. The CDC recommended a few years ago everybody should be tested. We know that probably 250,000 people in the U.S. who are positive don't know they're positive, and we know that when people know they're positive, they do take steps to reduce transmission to others, and they seek. And the other thing is that then they can take care of their own health. So everybody should get tested, bottom line, and at least once. And then those for MSM, it's recommended get an annual test to stay on top of things. And if we're positive, we want to see a doctor and make sure we're doing everything possible to stay healthy. And I think then knowing your status is a term that's been used in education campaigns, but I do think testing is an important part of that. I guess those off the top of my head are a couple of responses I would give for education, because getting tested is a part of the education. Everyone should know their status. We shouldn't be out there not knowing. We do have strong new treatments. Mm-hmm. We're fortunate to be in the richest country in the world, and there are programs for people to get into care.
Okay. Now, for those who want to to educate themselves and want to read up on any of the research, which medical journals would you recommend for folks to specifically this particular study with vaccine studies and testings and carried on?
I think one of the best sources is through that HopeTakesAction.org website, or through the HopeClinic.emory.edu website, or there's another one for the national program, hvtn.org. That stands for HIV Vaccine Trials Network, but hvtn.org. But I think the easiest way for people is to go to some of these websites and then follow the links that say things like learn more, or their Q&A. You quoted from one of those. There are blog and chat opportunities. But there's if you kind of spend a little bit of time in these websites, you can get to a lot of information. They tend to have links to other information sources. A good one for HIV vaccines is IAVI.org, and that's IAVI. That stands for International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. It's a nonprofit that is an advocate for vaccine development. Remember earlier we talked about how there was great advocacy for positives to get strong treatment and better treatment 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It was amazing, the advocacy we saw. The thing that was striking was for all the people that are currently uninfected but will become infected in the next 5 years, who's their advocate? They don't have an advocate because they don't yet exist. They are, they're waiting to, in essence, for something to happen. So this is an organization, I think, that's doing a great thing, and they have some good newsletters and educational pieces that they put out to kind of get people up to speed if they want to learn more about the general topic of HIV vaccines.
Okay. Now, does Hope Takes Action have a Facebook page that maybe some participants or others who want to connect on Facebook or Twitter, are any of those pages available for the organization?
They are, both for the Hope Takes Action and for the Hope Clinic. We have a Facebook page and a Twitter account, and I don't have those with me, but I think people can find those, although I have to confess I'm not very savvy on those. But I'm hoping there's a way they can get to them. I need to get up to speed.
I'm putting it in the chat room, and there as you're saying it, I'm letting them have the information as well. Okay. Well, wonderful, wonderful. Now, let me ask this, because I know you're saying that currently the study is utilizing men. Will there be a study where women become the focus down the line, or why was it that men are only targeted right now? Is it because they're growing? I know we said earlier that young black men were growing fast between the what was that under the age of 24. So is that why?
Yeah, okay. That's part of it. And there are studies for women. We have a study that'll be opening soon that will be recruiting both men and women. It's an early phase study. We're looking at safety and immune response. So before you get to these studies where you're asking, does it work in terms of protection, which is what this 505 Life Forward study is, the one we've been talking about. We have early phase studies where we just need to know, is it safe and well tolerated, and does it induce the type of immune response? So we draw some blood and look in the lab, the kind of immune response that we think would provide protection. For those studies, we enroll men and women. We don't have to have people at high risk. I'm a past participant in an HIV vaccine trial, 10, 15 years ago, an early phase study. So we do have studies for women. There also are women who will be participating in the efficacy studies, the final phase studies, where we're asking, does it work? We're not doing that in this Life Forward study. That's a study for men only. In part, it's because we wanted to focus on a group that we knew we could recruit. We're not totally sure how to find and recruit the women who are at highest risk for HIV. We did a study in the past where we enrolled both men and women, and most or all of the infections occurred in men, and we had very few in the women. I think in part it's because we didn't do it right, and there's research going on now to figure out how do we identify women who are, when they have unprotected sex, coming in contact with the virus. We know we enrolled women who were having unprotected sex, but they weren't getting infected, so they must have been that their partners were not, at least at a very high frequency, HIV positive. But there are women like that, and we have to sort of sort that out. And so there's research going on to look at that. Now, fast forward, in the next year or two, we're going to be increasing our studies internationally in South Africa, for instance. And there you have a very high prevalence and incidence, in other words, new infections and general population already infected with HIV in both men and women. They have more of a generalized epidemic there. And so women will be participating fully in studies of these late-stage efficacy studies. Does the vaccine work in heterosexual populations, men and women, in some of the international settings? It's just that in the U.S. we haven't quite figured out how to do that. And I want to mention how thankful I am to have had the chance. Unfortunately, I've got something coming up here soon, so I'm going to have to wind up shortly. But I want to say, take any final thoughts or questions from you. And my time is just about up what I have available for this today. But I'd love to come back anytime.
All right. Well, you know what? You're right, because we're down to the last 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure what your time frame was. All right.
No, I got my timer up. But yes, the last question, and I'm curious on that. Well, first, will you be participating with the HIV Vaccine Awareness Day that's coming up next Tuesday on the 18th in D.C.? Because there was something here on AIDSvaccine.org is the website for those who want to know more information. But I just came across this on Facebook prior to us coming on the show today, and there's this whole rally for this, and I know that this is important. So, are you going to be participating in this particular study? I mean, Awareness Day rally, or would you be doing your own here, as we said, with the 22nd and the 23rd with the bike ride coming up?
Yeah. Well, we're going to do both. We are having the 22nd, 23rd bike ride, but on the 18th here, we're going to have a program, and I'll be participating in that. And I don't have many of the details of that, but Days On at Sister Love, one of our community partner organizations, they do tremendous work in the area of AIDS education, particularly with women. And Days On Dixon Diallo is a member of our community advisory board, and at her organization, we're going to have a session for community leaders. I'll be there giving a talk, and maybe we can get you some more information about the availability of that. But there will be some local activities on May 18th. We do something every year. In the past, we've had a what we call the what was it called? Hope Springs Eternal Fun Run, which was an event in downtown Decatur where we had a little 5K and a walk and educational opportunities, and we also linked it to the bike ride. This year we've separated them a little bit. The bike ride will happen a little later. We're going to do this event on HIV Vaccine Awareness Day. Every year, May 18th is a day when we say to the community and to the world that, hey, we need a vaccine. We don't have one yet. We want you to be aware. We want to engage you, and we would love to invite your participation. So that will be happening here in Atlanta on May 18th.
All right. Well, lovely. Lovely. And my final question, the idea that saliva kills HIV, and this is strictly for those who are very heavy on oral copulation. What were the latest findings on that? Was that something that fizzled out, or are they looking to reproduce and find a way to produce saliva synthetically or whatever? What was that?
Yeah, there has been some work looking at factors that are in saliva that might have some inhibitory activity. I think in a way it has fizzled out, and here's why. Unfortunately, we know that there are people whose only method of contact, of copulation was through oral sex, and those people have gotten infected. There are people like that who have become infected. So clearly it is a route by which HIV can be transmitted, and it is probably not to be considered as a 100% safe alternative to condom use because of these studies which clearly show that you can become HIV infected even if your only type of sex is oral sex.
Wow.
But I do think there were reports about saliva early on, and I think maybe some of that work is continuing, but it's not something that I would want people to feel totally secure in, because I think the evidence that we have says, unfortunately, that that's not true.
Okay. Well, all right. I think I just got my 60-second count. So we have just done it. I got you in. I want to take this time to say thank you, Dr. Mulligan, for coming on and sharing this vital information with us. I'm very grateful to you for sharing that with the audience. And if there's anything that you need, any kind of new information that comes out, Dishing Tea will always be a platform for you. I welcome you back at any time to share the latest information with us. So thank you for your time.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you so much. I have personally enjoyed it very much, and for the program, for the cause, the mission, this has just been tremendous. And I hope that your audience will follow up if they're feeling motivated to do so, and check out some of those websites and phone numbers that we talked about. And I would be pleased to be invited back in the future, and I'll sure come to you when we have something that we want to talk about.
All right. Now that there's a wrap. So thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who have stayed on and who listened. We want to take this time and say that go out, get tested. I get tested every 6 months because I had a rambunctious past. So just for my own clarity, I get tested every 6 months. So I want you to go on, get tested, and understand what this is. We do have testing for vaccines and stuff now. I want you to go forth and to spread that information, okay? With that in mind, my darlings, I thank you all for taking your time out to dish tea with me. Honey, you've been dishing tea with Big Meats. Thank you so much. I will talk with you again soon. Bye-bye.